Thank you so much for the invitation to come and speak today, OzVeg. I'm actually going to be a little bit controversial today, and I think the first speaker that I walked in on, sorry, I can't remember your name, actually set the scene very well as well. So while I'm talking about product differentiation, I'm actually going to also talk about how do you go from fork to farm rather than farm to fork. Who's with me? Yeah? Okay, I've got 25 minutes to convince you. Fantastic. So with my experience in fast-moving consumer goods and having launched more than 800 innovations around global markets, I hope I can stand up here and be able to share this. At the end of the day, what wins in packaged foods and fast-moving consumer goods or quick service restaurants or food service channels are these guys. That's the consumer and the shopper. My question to you is, how often do you think of them when you're looking at the domestic market or the export market? Where do they factor in your thinking when you start to think about innovation? I'm just going to ask you questions because I don't know all the answers. Okay, so fork to farm. When you think about the point of difference or winning in market, what is going to help us as Aussies actually fight the global fight? I think we heard before that we can't be complacent on clean, green and trusted. A few other countries, I was in New Zealand speaking on Thursday and Friday, and they're saying the same thing. I think if we look at our Kiwi neighbours, they've probably done a pretty good job over us in terms of 100% pure and having a brand New Zealand. The key thing here is, if you look at this slide, I'm not an expert on processing or farm, you are in the room. What we're good at is actually helping you figure out if you've got the right opportunity for the fork, and how do you actually position your product in the place of reality, which is either the supermarket or an e-commerce channel, to ensure that you win in the market. So if you think about a fork, it's asking yourself these questions. Where is the market? Who is the consumer? What are the trends in play that you need to be aware of before you actually put your product in the market? Understand the consumer need. And it's not just the consumer needs, it's actually also the cultural context. If we think about the beast that is China, the Chinese are a very superstitious culture. If you package something in black and white, guys, it's funeral colours. It's the death of your product. I know a few companies have done that. So think about it. It's not just really understanding what the consumer wants, but actually understanding the cultural context of how you need to overlap that on your product innovation and your pack design. When I talk product, I'm talking holistic product and pack, right? So then you ask the question, is there an opportunity for your product, for your innovation? Otherwise, why bother launching it if you're not going to make money? Is there anyone in this room that doesn't want to make money? Come on, interact with me, show me some hands. Who doesn't want to make money? No one, right? So we're in the right space. The key question is then, what is the value? If we think about export into Asia, it's all about high value premium, and I'll come back to that later. But here's around the place. So what I call the place of reality, what in fast-moving consumer goods and all the experience we've had, is you've got to pick the right channel. You can diversify across channel, but what is the channel? Is it bricks and mortar? Is it wet market? Is it e-commerce? Is it a mix of both? Is it food service? Is it QSR restaurants? Who is the shopper? Sometimes we tend to forget the difference between a consumer and a shopper. So think about mum, who's both the consumer and the shopper. She's making the purchasing decisions. When you're looking at your product innovation, do you ever talk to the consumer and the shopper? What is the difference? How does the shopper shop the category? It's a really busy marketplace out there. How do you stand out? And what is the best way to merch and range your product? Are you standing out in front of your competition? So if it's okay, I'll skip the processing and the farm because, as I said, I believe you guys are the experts. Killer slide number 1 for you to remember today. Here's what most fast-moving consumer goods do. When I told you about the 800 products that I've launched, most people do it the traditional way. So you look at the insights, you understand the market, you size it up, and you say, I have an opportunity that's worth X, whatever, millions of dollars. You then very quickly say, here's all my ideas that I think I can actually execute this opportunity. You develop it, you commercialize it. In fast-moving consumer goods, 1 out of 10 products survives after the first 12 months of launch. 9 out of 10 fail. There is no magic bullet. Has anyone found one? No? I'm getting them nods and shakes. So what do we do? And what we have learned is if you really embed yourself in the consumer, the shopper, the market, the trend, the technology, you can ensure that you're actually going after the right opportunity. So we interrogate this really, really well. And then along this whole value chain as we are developing it, your innovation journey, is we eliminate the failure points. And therefore you increase the risk of your success by 30 to 50% plus. Examples. And they're going to be fast-moving consumer goods examples because we'd like to help fish producers and growers and we haven't got one yet. But it does work because we have taken some of these learnings in there. Marvelous Creations by Mondelez, rated the world's #1 product 2 years ago. Couldn't make enough to sell. Started in Australia, now has gone all around the world. That's how you increase your odds of success. The other thing, we tend to focus too much on product and pack innovation. But these guys who are called Dublin, anyone use their model or anyone heard of them? No? Perfect. It's a great tool to use. I've used it all throughout my career. Basically what they say is the value is not always in the product. There's value across your whole value chain. So the answer maybe to innovation is not always about launching a product. It's looking across your value chain, whether it's your supply chain or upstream at your suppliers where the value is. Generally in fast-moving consumer goods, when we develop a product, the recipe only accounts for 30% of the cost of goods. What is the first thing you do when you want to bring some money in and increase your margins? You tweak the formulation or the pack. You're working on 30% of the value, guys. Where's the other 70%? You can come and learn this as a model to use. So, very easy for me to stand up here and go, here's only the 5 questions you need to ask. How do we do it? And how can you do it? This is the approach we take. We make it really transparent. You can come and learn as well. Lots and lots of companies, actually over 800 businesses have learned this way over the last 3.5 years with us. It starts with actually understanding what you know versus what you don't know in the marketplace. Really simple question, right? But probably we don't actually pause to ask those questions. How do you bring together the people who are working on a innovation approach to make sure that you can actually answer those questions and get alignment with your stakeholders on where is the hypothesis or the opportunity that you want to go and find and figure out. The second part is called product mapping. How do you find the white space? Trust me, there was never any new product that was launched. How do you know that what you're going to be launching and developing tomorrow is going to be not a me too, is going to have a point of difference? The last 2, product labs and product guidelines, is a bit more complex, and I'll sort of go through very quickly on what that looks like. Here's knowledge mapping. It's all about bringing together the knowledge in the context of your organisation, understanding what you know and what you don't know. We're just about to actually start a project with a fresh produce grower, and the first thing that they have is they've got a lot of knowledge in the business. They've tried lots and lots of things. They go to lots of European trade shows, come back with great ideas, and guess what? They throw it against the wall and hope that one sticks in a Coles or Woolies store. Over the years, they have gathered a lot of knowledge, but they actually haven't learned what works and what doesn't work. Very, very expensive way to do innovation. Here's an example of product mapping. It's basically mapping all the products that are in the category you want to go and play in. We can do this in everyday to premium, which is something that we do for export into China, healthy or indulgent, depends on where you're looking at. Look at purple carrots on my right over there. You can see premium versus healthy and where purple carrots come. So it's taking in the lens of what the consumer sees. So my question to you is, if you are looking at a space for carrots and added value carrot products, you can see we've actually also taken packaged foods, because at the end of the day, as a share of mouth, you are competing with packaged foods. Don't just say, well, carrots, I'm going to be in that category and my competition is other similar vegetables. No, your share of competition is actually bigger than that. So how do you make sure that you can develop the right offer that convinces the shopper to shop your category? Here's a tool that does it. A great example of this is the guys at Chobani. If anyone actually eats the yogurt, they use this tool to come out with a one-handed squeezable pouch. 10 million revenue later, they've recently done it with their dips range as well. So you can learn it and use it the very next day. Here's that very much more sophisticated stuff around the product labs and guidance. Basically, in a nutshell, in a very simple way, we will show you what your product offer must be, what it can be, and what it can't be. This is all embedded in understanding the consumer, the market, the cultural context. So for instance, if we're looking at, I think we've got salad packaging here for convenience, we're saying to you that your product must be authentic, have nothing to hide, can be on the go. It can't be old school and retro, it can't be artificial and gimmicky, and it can't be too industrial. But you say, what does it mean? How do I bring it to life? At the bottom you see here, we can say, how do you actually express that in what your product starts to look like? So using materials other than plastic, paper or twine, for instance, starts to move you towards the authentic category, which means you can charge high value premium because the consumer is willing to pay for it. How can you not be old-fashioned? Don't queue fresh, modern touches to help you to queue freshness on a pack. That could mean foil, for instance, which may mean too industrial. Right? So these are the cues that we can actually share with you around your product to actually help you figure out what the lens is. Because we all know in the reality of doing business, yes, you need to make compromises, but not so much where you start with a round ball that you're trying to develop and it becomes a triangle on the end of the day, and then you wonder why no one buys it. So if you go back to your fork to farm approach, what we're saying is, how do you start to really think of these things up front before you look at what you can farm? Because it's about the opportunity. Then you can bring it to life. I always say you can do all the sexy R&D and marketing, but if the shopper doesn't pick your product off the shelf, you haven't done your job. And guys, having worked for over 5 years in Asia, across Japan, China and Thailand, Asians eat with their eyes first. So how do you really ensure that your product is popping out? It's all about the packaging. At what point in your product differentiation and development cycle do you think about the packaging? Most people do it last, yeah? Not first. What we're saying is you've got to really start first, because this is the thing that's going to make it fly off the shelf or off a bin or whatever it is that it's sitting in. The place. This is an example from Woolies, but that's your competition right there when you're sitting there. I get it, you can't brand at the minute and there's a number of issues on that, and I'm not going to be the expert that argues about why you can't brand fresh or anything like that. All I'm trying to say is it's crowded out there. How do you differentiate? The place of reality is actually understanding the shopper. There's numbers of ways to understand the shopper. I gave you a differentiation between consumer and shopper before. How do you start to really see when you are putting something in a planogram or in a shelf layout, where are people looking? Are they looking at your packaging? Are they looking at your product? Do you need to have 3 facings, 2 facings? At what location? How do you disrupt their eye? I worked at Fonterra for a number of years and I looked after yellow spreads. It's a 3-second category, guys. In 3 seconds, a shopper makes a decision on what yellow spread to buy. What is the number of seconds that you have to cut through in fresh? Even worse when you're in Asia. I've got a video, hopefully it plays. It's not as good as your technology, Chris. But this is where we look at the place of reality. It's a virtual supermarket. We have a Woolies, we have a Coles, we have an Asian store as well. But we do this really early on in the product development cycle. We want to see how our product will look before you go and spend lots of money doing the R&D, before you start to actually engage your supplier. Because this is a place of reality. If you haven't got this right, you're not going to win. So you can do all that, spend all that effort and all that energy doing your product right, but we always leave this to the nth degree. What we're saying is, how do you really bring that forward so you can start to ensure that you are actually looking at how you fulfill that place of reality. There's no shoppers in this supermarket, you would have noticed. It's more just to show you how we can start to do this. Again, fresh cuts. We're doing a big piece of work with a fresh producer most recently, looking at what their approach should be for innovation in convenience and grocery in fresh cuts. Some really interesting findings in terms of the domestic market, what the consumer is after and not after, which was a total surprise for them. They've been selling this for about 30 years now. These slides are from my friend Gillard, and he was recently at the Berlin show, and he basically bought some great photos back for me, but just to show you how some of the other guys are doing this, and I'm sure if some of you were there, you would have seen it. So here's execution at merchandising level in store. Again, taking fresh, drawing from the cues of fast-moving consumer goods. How do you bring elements of that in? You don't have to go to this elaboration, but you can really bring some in to start to actually dial that value across and command a premium. Lots of talk about China this morning and Asia. I think you all know that we're in this bubble. What we're saying to businesses is, let's not be the dining boom for Asia. Let's actually be the deli for Asia. And the key difference is high labour cost market, right? High utilities that are not going to go south, complex supply chain, plus all the regulatory battles you need to battle when you get into a country like in Indonesia or China or wherever. So how do you move the dial to high value premium? How do you be this deli and really create that point of difference so we don't just sit here and go, we're clean, green and trusted? We have a partnership with a mob called Costco. Anyone heard of it in the room? No? One? Okay. Costco is basically a $100 billion entity in China. They used to be Chinese government owned, now fully privatized. They have allowed us access to their innovation and R&D. Why did they do that, and why do we want to do this? Because we notice a huge, huge opportunity. You have the suppliers and the buyers that meet when the inbound missions and the outbound missions happen. The poor supplier or the producer is left here thinking, how do I navigate to get into a country like China? I told you about black and white packaging. I don't want to end up in that space. How do I make sure I navigate through all the regulatory checks before it starts to kill my opportunity? So through Costco, we can access their innovation and R&D, and basically means we can help you get your product right for the Chinese target consumer. You tell us if it's the middle class, if it's the upper middle class, it's the affluent in China, who do you want to target? Who do you want to sell to? And we can basically talk to them very, very quickly. So you bring that cultural lens in. An example, we had an olive SME producer come to us and said, we want to get into China, not with olive oil, but with other olive-based products. For 2 years, they spent trying to develop a global opportunity across US, China, and Australia. They came to us too late. There was only one question that we asked, is what is the Chinese cultural perception on olive-based product? He said to me, "It's healthy, Ange. We all see olives as healthy." I said, "Really?" "We do in Australia because we've been influenced by the Mediterranean diet." Guess what? We went and spoke to the target consumers in China, and what did they say to us? "It's not healthy. I'm not used to olive. And you want me to what? Use it in different ways?" So, not saying the opportunity is not there. What we said to the business is, yes, the opportunity is there, but are you willing to do the education? Could have saved them hundreds of thousands of dollars if they asked that question right up front. So don't forget that, right? And don't think of Asia as all of big Asia. We also have regulatory compliance checks that we can do, so making sure that we can take you all the way to CIQ qualification. And should you be on the strategic radar of Costco in terms of your product or your category, they can also open up a channel to warmy.com, which is their top 10 e-commerce channel in China, top 1 or 2 for food. All of a sudden, as an Australian supplier and producer, you have a less hazardous pathway to get into China. Here's some pictures of my, I'm on my last slide. Here's some pictures of me being in China the week leading into Chinese New Year. Do you see those mangoes on the bottom? Look at the price, if you can see it. If not, I'll read it to you. 52 Australian dollars for 2 Australian mangoes, gift wrapped. Behind it is another pack that you can actually put those mangoes in and gift wrap and give it to someone for Chinese New Year. Cherries, I think we all know the stories about cherries and oranges. The point I'm trying to make here, guys, is we go to Coles and Woolies and we spend $4 on mangoes. The Chinese are willing to spend 52 Australian dollars on 2. I don't know how much the farmer got, I'm sorry. All right, that's another debate to have. All I'm trying to show you is what the market is capable of paying. So the question is, do you want to be in that game? How do you move up that whole value curve of premium? How do you understand the Chinese culture around gifting, and how does your product play an opportunity in that? And you start to play in the $52 mango game. All right, lovely, tangible takeaways, hopefully, as I wrap this up. So, fork to farm. You haven't run me out yet, so hopefully you've heard. That's one thing, so thank you. So all I want you to do is these kind of things, and it's not always going to be easy because, yes, I can stand up here and say, but for all the 800 products I've launched, I've got equally a higher amount of failures, but you learn. So when you're considering your next product launch, before you grow even perhaps, ask the question, what is the need? Where is the opportunity? How does this play on the fork? How does it command at the plate? How do you look across the value chain? So innovation always does not equals new product. That Dublin model I mentioned, and I shared that value, where is the 70% of value? When are you looking at that? Because it could be that that's all that triggers. At the end of the day, if innovation doesn't turn $1, it ain't worth it, is it? Why do it? Consider the retail environment. So think of that earlier rather than later and last minute. Yes, I get it, there's the mercy of the retailer and everything else, but you can ask the questions. You can suggest. So, it's all about how do you stand out from the competitor, from the crowd. Export, high value premium. If I haven't said that before, I repeat again. Gifting is a great occasion. There's many occasions in a culture that we can tap into. How do we understand that better and move to that high dollar point before others around the globe catch on and do that? Because that's how you create a point of difference. And all of your clean, green and safe is just entry. Taking with pride. Ideas are great. I know lots of people go off to different conferences and trade shows and bring lots of great new product ideas. I mentioned about that producer who just throws things and hopefully one sticks. It's a very expensive approach. Screen your idea. It may work in Europe, it may not necessarily work here or in another market. And remember, if you want to increase the odds of success, you can come and learn these tools with us. There's my deets. If you want to contact me, I'm here till the end of the day as well. Thank you so much for your time.